Hello, and welcome to Grey.com Talks With. Today, we're talking with Beth Hassett, CEO of Weave, an organization that is promoting safe and healthy relationships and supporting survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, and sex trafficking. And if you're new to our podcast, please press subscribe button either on YouTube or your podcast app because today we're going to learn about an organization that is committed to breaking the cycle of violence by educating the community to better understand the issues of domestic violence and sexual assault. Hello, Beth. Welcome to Great.com Talks With. We're excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. Could you please describe Weave for someone who is not familiar with your work?
We are a fairly large organization serving the Sacramento, California capital region. And we provide an array of supportive services for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, including housing and legal assistance and counseling. And we also do education and prevention work, specifically with youth, to prevent domestic violence and sexual assault and to work with children who might have witnessed it or experienced violence themselves so that we can break that cycle and they grow up to not be a perpetrator of violence or a victim.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. The fact that you are providing support for survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, but you're also addressing it for the youth, to the youth at the age that they are forming their habits, they're forming their perception of you. So you are not working post factum for the youth, but pre factum, so you can better educate themselves to respect and to treat people, whether it's a male or female, the right way. How widespread are the issues of domestic violence and sexual assault in Sacramento area that you work in?
Sexual assault is a very underreported crime. And so we don't even know the full extent of it, but we serve hundreds of people a year who have come forward and either have recently been assaulted or were assaulted in the past and maybe didn't get any assistance and now are looking for therapeutic counseling, that sort of thing. Especially with the COVID pandemic, domestic violence rates are higher than ever in our region. People were trapped in homes with the person who is being abusive and are just now able to reach out for help. So we're seeing more and more people, especially needing legal assistance, wanting a divorce, looking for protections in the form of a restraining order that will keep their partner away from them, or needing help with child custody. And then as far as sex trafficking goes, there is a lot of sex trafficking that happens in the Sacramento region. We're kind of in a crossroads where it's easy to move people to and fro, and we're one of the most diverse counties in the entire country. So we have a lot of people, immigrants, people who don't speak English. It's really easy for somebody who's preying on folks to take advantage of them and to hide their activities.
Mm-hmm. Wow, the extent of those issues is quite large, and sometimes you mentioned most of it is underreported when it comes to sexual assault, and it's quite. Those issues are quite urgent, and they need more coverage, and they need more. The survivors, and as well as people who are facing those, they need more help. You mentioned that at the moment the number of cases of domestic violence is increasing and people are starting to speak up. What do you think are the reasons behind domestic violence? Why do people do acts of violence in their homes?
No, our philosophy is that it's about power and control. So it's one partner wanting to control the behavior of the other partner. And they use a variety of tactics to do that. We think of violence, so people think of being hit or strangled. But most victims are experiencing non-physical types of abuse. So a lot of emotional abuse. The person might be really jealous and isolate their partner so they can't get help, or financial abuse. We see that in almost all the people we serve. Not being allowed to work or being forced to work but give your money to your partner, being coerced into buying cars that you then don't get to use, and being in debt by the time you leave, and spiritual abuse, not being allowed to practice the religion that you care about, or further yourself through education. So it's really one person wanting to control the other person, and the other person having no power in that relationship.
Mhm. When we think of domestic violence, we think about physical violence, but the emotional violence that you mentioned and spiritual violence doesn't come to mind right away. But most of the cases, I believe, of domestic violence are of emotional abuse, are spiritual abuse, and the fact that you are raising awareness on that is wonderful. You also mentioned that you work towards the educating youth and educating community as a general on the matter of the sexual assault. And this month, April, is the month of Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Could you please describe the essence of this month, why it's important to have a dedicated month to raise awareness about this issue?
There are a lot of myths about sexual assault. One of the biggest being that a stranger is more likely to assault you, which is not the case. In 80% of the cases we see, it's somebody who's known to the victim and somebody that they trust. And so getting the word out there that it will likely be somebody that you already know that's going to take advantage of you. And if you didn't say yes, if you didn't consent to having sex with somebody or participating in a sexual act, then it was done against your will, and that's not okay, and it counts as sexual assault. The number one drug used to assault somebody is alcohol. And so it's not some fancy date rape drug like people hear about. And so we do a lot of education of people who work in bars and restaurants to notice when somebody might be looking for a potential victim who's getting very drunk, for instance, and intervening. When we talk to youth, we start talking as young as 5 years old about you get to decide who hugs you, who gives you a high five. And we start talking about consent and having boundaries at a young age, so that hopefully by the time they're of an age where they might be dating or going to parties, they have a good sense of self and their rights to say no to somebody. And the people who might be a perpetrator understand that people get to have boundaries and they don't get to cross those boundaries.
Mhm. Wow. Even the whether men or women, mostly women, don't themselves know that the act that was done to them was a sexual assault act, and the fact that you are raising awareness on that and telling them that you get to decide who hugs you from the young age, or you get to decide to provide consent or not, is something that needs to be done, and more action needs towards that issue to be taken. And the fact that you said you are educating people in the bars and people working in the restaurants, because alcohol is the most common drug to predators to use towards their victims, and for those people to see that, oh, okay, now I can save life or help this person to not be involved in such case and not ruin their life, is great. You previously you mentioned that most of the cases of a sexual assault are not being reported, and we don't know the extent to which it's widespread. Why do you think women or men are afraid or do not speak up when it comes to the cases that they have experienced or they have felt?
There are a couple things that happen. One is that they don't think anyone will believe them. It's usually a crime that has no witnesses. It happens one-on-one. So there's that. There's the fact that they know the person and they possibly purposefully went with that person somewhere. Maybe they were on a date with them. During COVID, we saw a lot of people going on their first dates in private homes with somebody they met on the internet and then getting assaulted. So there's a lot of shame and guilt for their own choices that they made, which are not founded, because it's never your fault if you're assaulted. But that's one big reason. The other is that law enforcement isn't always very sensitive and kind to victims. If they're going to get an exam where they take DNA from their body as part of the investigation, law enforcement has to approve that exam. So if the officer doesn't believe the victim, or the victim's afraid they won't believe them, they're not going to report that. Also, very few cases make it to trial and to make it through the criminal legal system. So there can be a sense that even if I do report this, nothing's going to happen to this person. So there are lots of different dynamics that in play that can really suppress how many people actually report the crime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the shame and guilt aspect of it is such it's very bad, because you mentioned that it's never your fault when you are being you are being sexually assaulted, and women need to realize that, and not feel guilt or shame because they didn't approve or something of an act that was done towards them, and raising awareness on that is very important. But the sad part of it is that you mentioned law enforcement doesn't take this issue very seriously, and it's just a case of my words versus your words. So it's very sad to see that, and hopefully the more policy makers will realize that and enforce stricter laws, and educate police officers who are dealing with these cases, these cases are very sensitive, and they need to be more sympathetic rather than saying, oh, it was your fault or something, oh, I don't believe you, and that. The third aspect of your organization, you mentioned that you work with survivors and the issue of sex trafficking. Could you please describe how does the person get to be in the sphere of sex trafficking, and how can they escape from it?
We work with children, youth, and we work with adults, and there are kind of two different dynamics. With the youth, most of the youth we see coming through as victims were in the foster care system. So they were already in a system that's a little bit broken. They had many, many placements. So they were being moved from family to family to family. And that is just the perfect environment for a predatory trafficker to come in and start grooming that usually girl. Taking care of her, buying her clothes, getting her nails done, either serving as kind of a boyfriend or as a father figure, and really grooming her to be trafficked. So it's very hard to get those girls, first of all, to even see that they're being victimized. They think that they're part of a system, part of a business, with somebody who cares about them, and then to want to get help. So what we see once they become adults is it gets to the point where, maybe they have gotten pregnant and they don't want to be living that life with having a baby with them. Their partner has gotten more abusive, is physically abusive to them. They're tired after, daily being sexually assaulted day after day after day. So we have to meet their very basic needs. We have to find them housing. We have to get them food. We have to help them with clothing, because they've had somebody who's been manipulating them and taking care of all those needs their entire life. So, there's a lot of psychological stuff that goes into helping somebody leave that life.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's incredibly sad that the broken system of foster care makes children and makes young girls to be trapped into a system that they are believed that they are taken care of, but rather in reality they're being taken advantage of, and it's incredibly sad and very heartbreaking. Yes, very heartbreaking. But the good thing is that there's such an organization that is yours that are trying to help the victims and survivors of sex trafficking. Could you please, you earlier you mentioned that you provide a wide range of services for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and sex trafficking, including legal and consular services. Could you please describe in detail what kind of services you provide and how are those services impacting the lives of survivors?
Certainly. Most of the people who come to us have some trauma associated with their experience of violence. So counseling and being able to, talk through what's happened to them is an important service that we provide. We do that in a group setting for domestic violence, and we also do it in individual sessions, depending on what they need. Legal services, we're helping people get a restraining order so that the person who's hurting them or stalking them can't come near them. And, it's just a piece of paper, but it's a piece of paper that law enforcement can use to arrest somebody if they continually break that order. And we also help them, ensure that they'll be able to have their children with them, because a lot of people don't leave because they're worried that the abusive partner is going to end up with the children. And usually that's a threat that they make. So we have lawyers who help them in the courts. And then we have a very extensive residential program. So we have an emergency shelter, large emergency shelter that can house up to 80 people on an emergency basis. So they stay with us an average of three to 6 months while they're figuring out what their next step is. And they're getting services while they're there. And we also have transitional housing where people can stay up to 2 years. So if they need to stay longer, we have cottages, we have apartments, and we also have some specific apartments that we rent for our sex trafficking victims, so that, again, they've got that roof over their head. We're meeting their basic needs. But within all of this, we're trying to help people be on a good footing when they leave. So we help with continuing your education, with getting you set up to find a job. We have an apprenticeship program in our own thrift stores where we, help you have a job and learn how to count money and show up to work every day. Just, whatever those skills are, whatever the survivor has identified as what they need to do to be strong and safe when they leave, we're providing to them. And if they have children with them, we have programs for the kids, because we want them to leave more resilient and ready to move through their life and not become a victim or perpetrator themselves.
Mm-hmm. It's great to hear that you provide a safe space for survivors to first of foremost to deal with their trauma and provide basic needs that they need, whether it's a roof over the top of their head for extend certain amount of months until they go through the process of realizing the trauma and working with their trauma. And you provide them also, you mentioned, with the basic skills that they can be equipped and approach life once they are out of the emergency shelter. Once they're their own, then they build their own self-esteem and self-confidence, and they can go and rule the world and do whatever they have their dreams of. Because although they were the victims, they are now survivors, and with your help they can overcome those wild and very sad issues that they faced, and it doesn't have to define them, and they can become even stronger by approaching their trauma and realizing that they have the power of changing their lives. If someone would like to support your organization, how can they do that?
They can go to our website, which is weaveinc.org. So that's WEAVEINC.org. There are also resources on there if somebody needs help. We offer, we have a support line that people can call on the phone, but we also have live chat. So somebody can click on live chat and actually communicate that way with one of our advocates. So that's an important lifeline for a lot of people, especially during the COVID pandemic, where people were trapped in a home with somebody and maybe couldn't make a voice call, or maybe they're in another part of the country or the world and need support, and that's a way they can reach somebody 24/7. So yes, there are many ways to support us, and it's all on the website, weaveinc.org.
Awesome. For you listening, the link to the viewing.org will be provided in the description, or if you are in a need of help, whether it's a domestic violence issue or sexual assault or sexual trafficking, Viv and Beth's team is there to support you. Thank you so much, Beth. It was wonderful to get to know you and the great work that your organization is doing in terms of supporting survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and sexual trafficking.
Thank you so much for your interest in our cause.
Wonderful. For you listening, if you enjoyed this conversation, please press like and share button either on YouTube or your podcast app, because this will show the algorithm that this conversation is important, that we need to break the cycle of violence by educating people to better understand the issues of domestic violence and sexual assault. Thank you, and see you in the next episode.